Hello everyone, this is Take from bigheadtaco.com and welcome to BHT Studios. I am here to do my first impressions look of the brand new Fujifilm X-S10, which is somewhat difficult to articulate. It is a very unique, unusual camera because I think a lot of us thought that this camera would be an X-T30, which would have made a lot of sense. But Fujifilm is very particular about the designs. Now I have an X-T30 here. Let me just zoom out here. This camera here should have been a replacement of the X-T30, just like how the X-T3 was replaced by the X-T4 somewhat. But it seems that Fujifilm is experimenting with fully articulating screens. They are wondering if people want the more traditional articulating screen that just kind of flips out like this, right? And you can do waist level shooting much easier, or if they want more of a swing out and sideways articulating screen like this. So the X-T3 is similar to this, but it does also have a third articulation. This thing here is a lot like the X-T4 and different from the X100. The X-T100 series. This thing here, as you can see, the screen is already faced out and it flips forward, and then it also articulates this way, which is you can do some really weird angles with this. But this one, you can actually still articulate more traditionally like this, right? Articulate like this, just like the X-T30, but also articulate out and then forwards, much like this camera here. So we did ask back when the X-T100 first came out and said, Fujifilm, why can't you put a screen like this on the X-T30? And Fujifilm made it very clear that the design language of the X-T30, like this was an award-winning design. It is a very pretty camera, like a lot of Fujifilm cameras. It has kind of a vintage film camera vibe to it, and Fujifilm basically says that that vibe would be somewhat, not ruined, but interfered with if they put a screen like this on the X-T30. And true to Fujifilm's word, instead of sticking a fully forward-facing articulating screen on the X-T30, they decided to create a camera like this. And so internally, the guts are very, very similar. There's just a very few little differences, but the EVF is very similar or the same. The way the battery goes in is different actually. The XS10 goes in this way here, and it takes advantage of the grip, which is nice because now if you have a tripod plate on here, you can access the battery easier, but you still have to go through the bottom to get the memory card, which I never like it when memory and battery are kind of next to each other. That is the kind of, under the pro level camera body specs of these cameras, including the EVF. You're not going to get the same magnification, 0.39 I think on these guys, and you're getting much larger on the X-T3, X-T4, X-H1 type series. And so I understand why people are comparing these two, and in some ways it is kind of a hybrid of, just move this out of the way here, of the X-H1. Because the X-H1 was also kind of a weird camera when it came out, right? Because it didn't follow the same design language as either the X-T2 at the time or the X Pro 2 at the time. It kind of had more of a DSLR feel. It had a screen on the top, and it had that feather touch shutter button, which does not exist on here. It looks very similar, as you can see. The shutter buttons look similar, but the X-H1 is very feather touch, and the grip is still better on the X-H1 than the X-S10. It's tighter in here, and even this on and off is a little tighter, and the press is weird. It kind of reminds me of the X Pro 3 and the X-T4, where you have to press a little harder to get the half press, where the X-H1 had the opposite problem, which you do get used to, which is the half press is so feather light that you, instead of half pressing, you end up actually starting and stopping the video. And so to me, it's kind of a mixture of the X-T30 with the X-H1, as well as the X-T4, which I would have down here, but I'm actually shooting the video with the X-T4. So that's kind of where this the X-S10 sort of sits. It has an X-H1 grip, it has an X-T4-like LCD screen, and then the guts of the X-T30. And in terms of pricing, it's $999. This has dropped, I think, to about $800. The X-H1 is funny, when just as it was being discontinued, it was down to about $999, but I think it was like $1899 when it first came out. And this was an experiment. Some may consider it a failed experiment, but I don't really think so. I think the only issue with the X-H1 was they should have waited to put in the X processor 4, which would have given this the same autofocus and the processing power as the X-T3 and the X-T4 and the X Pro 3 and the X100V and the GFX 100, and they ended up using the older processor. So even the X-T30 in a lot of ways is more powerful than the X-H1 when it comes to processing power. And so you know, this X-H2 supposedly that is coming will, I hope, will maintain this articulating screen, but we will see what Fujifilm does. And that's why I think this is kind of an experiment. And they decided not to call it an X-T40 because if people didn't buy it, meaning a lot of hardcore Fujifilm shooters are actually stills photographers. A lot of stills photographers do not want to have to swing this out and then over, right? They want to be able to just flip it this way and immediately be able to use it as like a waist level finder type. And so I think in a way this is an experiment, and if this fails, then they're like, oh well, we'll just go back to this design. But even better, hopefully they will come up with an X-T40, and it will be basically something like this, but without the fully articulating screen, and still be able to put IBIS in here, because the IBIS mech in here is generation 3, right? So the IBIS mech here on the X-H1 was generation 1, and then technically generation 2 would have been the GFX 100, and then generation 3, but really it's, I think, 2 in terms of miniaturization. They've shrunk it in the X-T4, and they again shrunk it in the XS10. And so they are doing what Fujifilm promised years ago, which was their original goal was to shrink the IBIS mechanism so they can put it in smaller cameras like this, and they have succeeded. And by putting this grip, I think it's great. I think a lot of people will prefer this grip here, and I do like that these dials on a camera like this. I understand with a pro level camera having a dedicated ISO button, there's no, because of the screen, there is no exposure compensation dial in the back. It's this weird button pressing, which I never liked. I do like that it has these 2 programmable dials. I can't make it do everything that I wanted to do, but I'll dig in the menus later, and when I do my full review, I'll let you know what I think of this. But overall, on a camera like this, I think it makes sense having easy access to ISO and the Q, and then you have these 3 customizable buttons as well. This, I don't know if you can make it into play, but I think that would be great because I do like right thumb usage, and you do have a front dial here as well, and then you have, you know, these 2 customizable dials. You have your joystick touchscreen, no D-pad anymore, which they've been doing that since the XE3, and now the X100 also has it removed to many people's chagrin, and as well the X-T30 doesn't have it. And I think that is part of a design language as well as simplifying the small real estate, right? This is a very small section over here where the X-H1, the X-T4, X-T3 has a lot more space here because these are bigger, heavier cameras, and so I think it makes sense to allow to have both the joystick as well as the D-pad and touch screen. And so let's talk about something that I think is kind of unusual. I will move these 2 cameras out of the way. I also had this sent to me from Sony. So for those of you who think that I somehow work for Fujifilm, and some even think I'm an ex-photographer, which is a brand ambassador, I am not. I am a camera reviewer and a photographer and a writer, and I just decided to eventually reach out to Sony and say, hey, there's some stuff I'm interested in checking out. And oddly enough, it is the A7C, because I feel that these 2 cameras have a lot in common. So let's put the lens on here that I think is one of the reasons why I really wanted to have both of these cameras at the same time. I feel that both of these cameras were built because of what YouTubers and vloggers have been demanding for years, which is a reasonably small, reasonably light vlogging mirrorless camera body with a fully articulating screen and a 3.5mm headphone jack. And I think, and with IBIS, and these two cameras, as different as they may be, have a lot of feature sets in common. Both of these are a size reduction from the A7 series. This is the smallest A7 full frame series mirrorless body, and I actually think that the Sonys have gotten prettier over the years. When they first came out, they were really weird looking, and they even put a little, I think they're taking kind of cues from Fujifilm as having different finishes, and I think this silver finish looks really nice, where the opposite has happened with Fujifilm. Fujifilm was obsessed with aesthetics, and I think this is probably one of their more functional but more ugly cameras. But you know, as a tool, you know, is it that important for you as a vlogger or as a travel photographer, or however you want to use this? How important is it for you that this is a very pretty camera? So these two have, you know, they're small, they're compact, they have built-in IBIS, and both these have a new generation IBIS mech. So the IBIS mech on the A7C is not the same that's in the A7 III series, right? It's a completely rebuilt design. This is also a complete rebuilt design. And so these two cameras, I think, are birthed because of what YouTubers were demanding from manufacturers, either for good or bad. And you know, there was a lot of negative press on the A7C, but I thought this is actually kind of cool. Out of all the Sony A7 series, this is the first one I actually wanted to review, and this has the FE 20mm f1.8, and I think this is the lens to vlog with the A7C, and Sony actually does have this as a kit. And this XS10 is also, I think, great for vlogging, and I think the new 10-24 Mark II that has OIS as well as WR. This does not have OIS, but it does have IBIS. I think this is a great combo, but unfortunately Fujifilm does not bundle these two together, and that's something I would recommend Fujifilm, is that I think a lot of people would want this as a combination. In terms of prices, I already mentioned the XS10 is $999 US, and then the lens is $999 US, the 10-24 Mark II, and the Sony A7C is $1798 US for the body and $848 US for the lens, but they actually do have a combo of these two together at $2546. So if you put these two together, it's just under $2,000. You put these two together, it's just over $2,500. So there is a $500 difference between these two. But if pricing is not a big deal for you, let's go over why you would go with something like this, or why you would go with something like the Fujifilm here. In terms of weight even, there's not a huge difference. The XS10 body only is 415 grams, where the A7C is 424 grams. So that's barely just under 10 gram difference. The difference is really in the battery weight. The weight of the battery is on the Sony is almost twice, it has 1,000 more milliamp hours, and you get way more shots out of the battery. The Sony uses the NP FZ100 2200 and 80 milliamp hours with 740 shots, and that's an 85 gram battery. It's a big boy. It uses the same batteries that are on the larger Sony A7 series and A9 series cameras. While the Fujifilm XS10, again, although they've gone this way to utilize the grip space, it is still the smaller MP W126S battery that's been around forever, and it makes sense why they use the smaller battery in here, but you're gonna get way more shots. This battery is rated, I think, at 325 shots versus 740. So when you put the batteries in, all of a sudden the A7C is 509 grams versus 465. And if you add the lenses, the Fuji kit here is 850 grams, and the Sony kit is 882 grams. Again, the difference is in the weight of the battery. So in hand, they're very similar in weight. This actually, for some odd reason, feels lighter, and I think it's because the lens is heavier on this. So this is kind of like front heavy, where this, because the body's heavier, it feels a little bit more back heavy. In terms of EVF, although they have a similar 0.39 inch, 2.3 million dot EVFs, the Fujifilm has a little bit more 0.62 times magnification versus 0.59, but when you look through it, neither of these are that great. If you look at something like a X-H1, you have this huge eye cup that helps to reduce kind of external light coming in, and in here it just looks nice and beautiful, and that's kind of where you're saving the money. This is the same as the X-T30, the X-T20. It's okay, especially if you wear glasses, it's not great. This is really bad. The A7 series typically has sort of a fake pentaprism hump, but really that's where the EVF is. For them to move it off to the side, it kind of reminds you more of the A6000 series. So they put a really kind of a small EVF in here. So again, I think this is meant for vloggers. They know that people are buying this so that they can use the selfie screen on here, and so they've reduced the size and the cost of the EVF, I guess. And so to do that, they have to compromise on the EVF here. As well, in terms of video, these both are sort of bottlenecked, but I think Sony has actually bottlenecked theirs even more. Both of these can do up to H.264 420 8-bit internal. And in terms of 4K, neither of these can do 60 frames 4K, but the Fujifilm does allow up to 200 megabits per second. They do shoot with Fujifilm. It is a 6K recording that's then downsampled to 4K, so I'll test it, but we'll see which does better video quality. I think the Fujifilm might beat this one out in terms of quality. The Sony is 420 8-bit internal with no time limit, where the Fujifilm has a 30-minute time limit. But in terms of heat dissipation, this will probably work a little bit better. And for full HD, you know, they both have the 24, 25, 50, and 60 frames per second with the faster 100, 120, and Fujifilm goes right up to 240p, but the IQ is a little okay, with the Sony goes up to 120 frames per second with just kind of okay image quality. So I am going to be testing both of these cameras as vlogging cameras. This can take fantastic stills. This basically has the same processor, sensor, and even the menu system as the older A7 III, not the new A7S III. And so menus is atrocious in here. It's very difficult to navigate my way through this. The Fujifilm is very simple. It's easy to navigate if you're used to the Fujifilm, but even if you're not, it's still a simpler menu system. Both of these do have the quick video button, so it doesn't matter what mode. This has been missing from Fuji for a long time, which is no matter what shooting mode you're in. So if you are, you know, let's just say you are in aperture priority and you're taking still shots, but as soon as you press this button, as you can see, video starts right away. And so that's nice. And then of course, ahead of time in video mode, you would have already set up all your frame rates and your ISO and stuff. So you can have it set where this is a completely separate menu from the video settings, which I do, because I do use that, that silent mode or the video mode setting. So none of these outer dials will affect it. And Sony's the same. Sony's had this for a long time. No matter what you're in, they have prioritized video. I do like with Fujifilm that you can use the shutter button to start and stop video, but for some people, they do prefer a dedicated video button. So that makes sense. If you're in aperture priority or whatever you're shooting, and all of a sudden you want to do a quick vlog or video, you just press that, bada bing, bada boom. You are now in video mode. So that's cool, and that's another thing why I think that these two cameras are very similar. I did do a quick vlogging test, and what I did notice right away with Fujifilm is it's nice having a tally light. You know when it's recording. Sony doesn't have a tally light, but they do have a light here, probably for self-timer mode. So Sony, it wouldn't be that difficult to convert that into a tally light. Fujifilm's been doing that, I think, since the X-H1, and now it seems like every camera that Fujifilm produces has the tally light feature. Either the front or the rear light will blink, or you can have both of them blinking or have it solid. But you know, with both of these having an articulating screen, I guess you can always kind of look and see if you are recording. So you have that. But in general, I think that both of these will do really well for vlogging. There is a $500 price difference between these two kits. This is a zoom, but you're stuck at f4. This is not a zoom, but you have f1.8 in full frame, which is like, I think, f1.2 equivalent in APS-C if you want the same shallow depth of field. So Fujifilm would have to come out with a 15mm f1.2 to equal this in terms of depth of field, in terms of shallow depth of field. And so wouldn't it be cool if Fujifilm did have like at least a 14mm f2, but if they can come out with a 14 or 15mm f1.2, or even at least the f1.4, for those that do like to vlog and kind of melt away that background, you're gonna get that with the Sony. And so I think these two are gonna be, to me, if you're a vlogger, and you want a light, compact, but very competent system, I think these two cameras would be the choice for you. And then with all the other Fujifilm cameras, if you're an X-T30 shooter, if you know, and you're still shooter, I think that they shrunk it enough where they will be able to create an X-T40 with IBIS. And so I would say, you know, give this a try. It is kind of ugly, but you know what? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. You may get used to this. I got used to the X-H1, and it is really, so far, my favorite Fujifilm X series body because of just how functional it is. And when I first saw this, I thought it was really ugly too, but I've got used to it. So if you are an X-T30 shooter, give this a try. It is nice to have IBIS, and it is nice now to be able to customize these two mode dials. But if you are a still shooter and you want this to be exposure comp, you want this, I mean, you know, I don't know if you can do this or not, but you know, make this into ISO. You do have more flexibility with the XS10 versus the X-T30. So that's my first thoughts on the Fujifilm XS10, and as well I have the Sony A7C with the 20 f1.8. Look for a test or review between these two bodies. Let me just zoom in here just for you guys. Look at that. There you go. Look at that. And I will be doing tests with this and I'll let you know what I think. All right, so thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, and we will talk to you soon. Happy shooting.